Hi, guys, and welcome back to A Millennial Mind. For today's episode, I'm so excited to introduce you all to my next guest. He is a presenter, a performer, and a producer, and most recently known for his skits for Planet Parle. So without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce Planet Parle.
Hello, how's it going?
I should have probably just introduced you as Parle, not Planet
I was
Parle.
just going to say, side note to anyone who's meeting me for the first time, the first name is Parle. I've done loads of shows and things, and people are like, "So Planet, like, how did you get into like making videos?" And I'm like, "That's not my first name." Especially when I go to India. When I go to India, they're like, "Planet, sir, Planet," and I'm like, "That's actually not my first name. Parle is the first
really
name."
You should have said your full name like a normal person, but
no, you gave my world an introduction, which is really sweet of you.
Well, I'm so excited for you to be here, and I'm so excited to talk to you. I feel like I've been waiting forever to speak to you. But for people who don't know you, I mean, if you don't know Planet Parle, I need to stop calling you that. If you don't know Parle, you've been living under a rock. But for people who don't know who you are, just give a little bit of an introduction about yourself and tell us what you do.
So, in simple terms, I make videos about growing up South Asian in the UK on the internet. I create sort of pop content online that sort of entertains people or kind of lets people dig deeper into their culture. And yeah, alongside that, I present TV sometimes, radio sometimes. Yeah, that's the best way to explain it. I don't want to give it too much of an in-depth sort of an analysis of what I do, because then people will be like, "Whoa!" But yeah, basically, I'm one of those YouTuber, influencer, presenter types, creatives. I don't know. Yeah, that's the best way to put it, I reckon.
So what I want to talk to you about today is the Indian expectation on careers. You haven't taken so much of a conventional career as Indians would put it, or Indians would perceive it to be. Mm-hmm. And I guess I just want to start exploring, why we have certain career expectations within the Indian culture and where they've almost stemmed from.
It's a wicked question, firstly. I think there's so much to this. Like, people say it as a negative thing, but I think one of the biggest things with being Indian is that success is a big part of our culture. So like an end goal. So whatever it is, whatever you are doing, there needs to be some sort of final sort of thing that you end up with. So it's almost like we're very much into this idea of future-proofing ourselves. So if we have a business, we need to have some sort of guarantee that it will be successful. If we are studying, we need to know that there is some sort of job available and what that position already is. So we're visionaries in the sense that we like to know what's next a lot of the times. I think that's not necessarily a negative thing, but it's almost become too rigid over the years. And I feel like with Indians living in the West, there's even more of an expectation because there's more opportunities. There's more of a chance of you being successful if you go down one of these conventional routes. So I think that Indian expectation of, you should be this or you should be that comes from that. And I feel like with us, i.e. children, you could say, of like migrant parents, migrant Indians, there was more of a struggle to sort of establish ourselves within society and, become people who are a part of the fabric of Britain. So because of that, there was less of an opportunity to sort of take a gamble or take a chance and do something unconventional and fail.
Definitely.
So it comes from this whole thing that actually you can do what you like, but you have to be successful. So then the next question is that, well, actually, how successful can you be if you work in the creative industry, or if you, work as an actor or a dancer or a creative or a comedian, or just something that doesn't have a guaranteed success rate, or we don't have many examples where lots of people have done that and been successful. Whereas if you become an accountant, the chances are you will get a job in an accountancy firm.
And also that about 100 accountants too, right? So
someone, growing up, someone who's already done that, someone who will give you a leg up in the industry or give you advice and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And I think that's where it stems from more than anything. Like now, if we were to give the success rates of working in the creative industry versus, I don't know, trying to become the owner of your own dentistry sort of practice, people would be
Yeah.
shocked to see that it's actually such a struggle. I have friends that have
It
become
really
like dentists and pharmacists, and they're telling me that they're struggling. And in my head, I'm like, how? You're dentists and
is.
pharmacists?
Yeah.
Like, come on, you have it on paper, don't you? I mean, that's my ignorance, right? Like, but they're all telling me that no, actually, it's really difficult in London. There's too many dentists. I'm like, how's that possible? Like, surely with the population of like, 12 million or whatever it is in London, that we need lots of dentists. So it's that we have this idea that certain jobs are more successful and other jobs are less successful. So chase the ones that are successful so you are living more comfortably. And it comes from this deep rooted care that
I agree.
Indian people have for one another. Like we are very caring. Like whenever I go to India,
So
the
true.
first thing that they ask is, how is your health? How are you feeling? How's your
Have you
digestion? And it's
eaten?
so weird. Yeah, have you eaten? And I'm like, that's some of the questions you're asking about my health are so personal. Whereas in the UK, as Brits, we're sort of like, oh, how's the weather? Oh, yeah, it was raining yesterday. Oh, it's a bit warmer today. Oh, yeah, hopefully it'll be a good summer. Or like, yeah, this winter's not been as
So
cold.
true.
We talk about the weather here. Whereas in India, the culture is to ask about you and your well-being, as in your physical well-being. Um, so we come from this caring culture. So I suppose that's where this expectation culture comes from.
Definitely. And I think also from my perspective, my parents, when they all they wanted was stability for us, right? So how you say we have a very caring culture, I definitely think that's true. And they only want careers that are going to be stable for you. And about 20 years ago when we were all applying, or not 20 years ago, not that old, 10 years ago, when I was applying, I was looking at things like optometry and dentistry and medicine. Now, I did not get the grades to do either three of those subjects. But, those were the things that were good and what you had to do. And then eventually I did law because growing up, I was always one that spoke out about things or would argue or always one that was outspoken. So people were like, "Oh, you'd be a good lawyer." But
That's
those
literally
qualities,
what happened with me. They were like, "Oh, you talk a lot and you argue and you
yeah,
so be a lawyer."
you always have to do something. So they were like, you should be a lawyer. So then I studied law and I absolutely hated it. It was the most awful time because I didn't enjoy the subject. And so I didn't want to learn. And actually we had a family friend yesterday who said to me, "Can you tell me about law?" And I was like, I'm really not the best person because I really wasn't passionate about it. I think in order to make a decision about what you want to do, you need to explore the things that you could be passionate about. But I think from our parents' perspective, it was really about stability, making sure, like you said, we had a purpose. We knew what we were going to do. We were future proofed. We weren't going to be left in the lurch. And I think as them, as immigrants coming into this country, they, had to struggle a lot more than us because they didn't
Yeah.
have the same educational prospects that they gave us. So, they did have to struggle and therefore they just didn't want us to go through that. So I 100% think that that is what it was like for them. Do you still think that these expectations exist?
Yes and no. So like I think the good news is that because there's been like a surge in visibility of people like myself and even people like yourself who are doing things that are in the creative sector or in the media sector, all of a sudden it's almost slowly becoming normal. So people
Yeah,
are like, oh, actually, someone can do this and, actually be paid for it or like work in this industry. Um,
yeah,
so
sure.
like people, especially like the next generation of parents, like Indian parents, they are realizing that actually there is options and opportunities there. And there's also this element of, well, I didn't get these opportunities and like at the end of the day I want my children to be happy in whatever it is that they are doing, so yes, I want to push that. But saying that, like, this idea of success is so deeply embedded in our culture and our DNA that there is still like a sizable sort of Indian population here in the UK, especially, that will still go on and pick something safer because they know that success is ultimately what will give them the life that
Yeah,
they thought is the right way. So, like, most people, they
yeah,
are told that, oh, you will be happy once you find a partner, settle down, buy a home in, the suburbs, send your kids to either a grammar or a private school, drive a nice car, holiday about 3 to 6 times a year, wear these clothes, watch these films, go to these places for drinks, do these things, and you will ultimately be really happy. And
Definitely. Or
that,
settled. Settled is the best word that everyone always says. Like, you're not settled. You need to be settled.
yeah, so yeah,
Whatever on earth that
that
means.
whole, yeah, once you settle down, you'll be really happy. And I feel like that model, the reason why it worked so well for our parents is they genuinely didn't have the privilege or the time or
Hmm.
the reach to even dream about that sort of the sort of happiness where you literally sit on your sofa with a cup of tea and go, what is happiness? They didn't have that. Their happiness was pay the bills, and if you pay the bills and you
Yeah.
can buy your kids some toys and maybe go on holiday or just do something for yourself or spend some time with the family for Christmas and Diwali and maybe go India once a year or Africa once a year or just have a holiday here and there. Your happiness is done. And like, why are you asking for more? You don't deserve more.
Yeah.
You've worked, you made the money, your kids are happy. I've
What
got
more do you want?
gratitude and now my
Yeah.
happiness is done. Whereas
Yeah.
our generation are like, okay, I had the privilege of like having almost everything growing up, obviously with the touch of the dessiness, of course, as well. But what is happiness? What is making me truly happy? Is it working in a 9 to 5 where I'm working for a corporate, which is, yeah, it's fun. I have a good drinks culture. I'm making a stable salary. But am I
Yeah.
waking up on a Monday morning and bouncing out of bed from excitement? Or am I going, oh, I have to commute into Central, get this work done. Oh, I'll be fine once I have a coffee and get there. So we're beginning to
Yeah.
question these things. And that's what puts us in that changing position, I suppose, right?
Definitely. No, 100%. And I guess there, like you said, there's loads of positives from having these certain expectations. I think a lot of kids are very successful and they've been given the greatest of advice. They've been given great advice. But I guess what's sometimes the negatives or the problems with having these certain expectations?
Well, you can end up living like a plastic life, isn't it? This you follow the expectations and you get everything, but you're not ever truly happy, and so you've just lived this life where you are meeting expectations, but you internalize everything else that you are feeling, and then when you internalize what you are feeling, that actually has a negative impact on people around you.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
if you like dig deep, I suppose, in to the Asian community, I'm sure that there's plenty of issues you find on like emotional abuse within couples or domestic abuse. And I'm not saying that these are higher within the Asian community or lower or it's our like some sort of Indian problem that we have all these things happen. But in order to be a
Yeah,
successful community, we should be looking at these issues as well. And I feel like
definitely.
when people internalize their issues or they live like this life where they're chasing someone else's dream, they're not really and truly happy, and then that has a negative impact on everyone around them. So like there's this negative
Mhm.
energy sort of in the circle which is being built from falseness. So
Definitely.
there is a negative impact because the amount of people I meet, like they'll be like, oh yeah, I used to do this, and I'm like, well, why don't you anymore? And they're like, oh well, now I'm busy with work. And I'm like, well, you can still take it on as a hobby or do it on the side, but they genuinely just don't have time. So like
Yeah.
a huge part of them that they're having to give up. And I'm not saying that, life isn't something that where you're not going to have sacrifices. Of course you are. Like I have to sacrifice so much as it is for doing the creative work, but then you always have one thing you want a bit more than the other, right?
Definitely.
The end.
I
And
completely
obviously, the
agree.
grass always seems greener on the other side, but still, you have your calling and something that, really gets you going. And I feel like this year, especially, a lot of people are realizing, like, from being at home, that actually the job that I've
This is
been
what I'm
doing for
trying
like
to, yeah.
5 years, I absolutely hate it. And the things that I'm doing at home is what I want to do. I'm going to just do a 360 and set up a business, or
Yeah,
I'm going to
definitely.
start doing a podcast like what you're doing,
Mhm.
or I'm going to start making YouTube videos, or I'm going to start painting
Mhm.
or cooking or something else that's not
Definitely.
doctor, dentist, accountant, lawyer.
And I think the pressure of being fitting into a mold, and I've seen this in loads of people, is that it ruins relationships because parents initially put pressure on you to do well, like you said, because they want to see you succeed. And I truly believe that, my parents did put pressure on me to study, but if I didn't study, then I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be able to do this because I'd be doing another job. So I'm really grateful for having that pressure. But there are some children who are faced with so much pressure that they have to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or a dentist or whatever they have to be, that it removes any joy of learning.
Yeah,
And I think there is so much joy in learning. And I
completely.
honestly could say at school, at university, I hated studying. I've always hated studying. And then when I did a postgraduate diploma and I did that in business management, I loved it. I felt so happy. I was so excited to learn. I would do all the homework. I do all the reading. I
Yeah,
mean, I've kept all of the readings now because I read back on them every weekend
yeah,
because I loved it. And the only reason I was exposed to that was through my company. Now, the other thing is, and what you've just said just now is, it's very hard to figure out what you want to do when you're doing a 9 to 5 job. You've got children. You've got to work out. You've got all of these other pressures on you. How did you find what you wanted to do?
it's always just from day dot known that I want to work in some sort of creative industry, whether that's on the stage or whether that's
Mhm.
around cameras or whether that's in a branding meeting or whether I've always known that. And I feel like I was one of those people that just always knew. A lot of people don't know, and I feel like a lot of people don't know because they've not actually been given that sort of access to even access that emotion as a child. Like I see so many parents when I'm working around children, and even if their child like is coloring in for too long or something, the parents will be like, "Okay, enough of that. Like, okay, now look at this." And I'm like, "Your child is enjoying that so much in school. They are spoon fed, a curriculum and whatever." And
Mhm.
of course, I'm not denying the importance of academia and all of that. That's so important. Like, I am where I am because I did a Bachelor of Science at the end of it. Like, I had to learn about the technical brilliance of creating digital content and, filmography and videography. I did that in a technical remit sort of thing when I studied at uni. But I would have never
Mhm.
really wanted to learn about the technical aspect if it wasn't for the fact that I, did the coloring in and did the creative stuff. So my parents were never
Yeah.
really sort of like, you can't do any of that. They were like, yeah, of course, do it. Like, it's fine. Like, if you love creative stuff, then do loads of creative stuff. And I feel like a big part of that has to do with the fact that both of my parents are really creative, whether it's in the kitchen or around the house, or if my dad might be painting, or my mum might be
Mhm.
crafting, or they both come from a really, really like strong creative backbone. And that's I've seen a sharp contrast between my uncles and aunts that have no
Yeah.
creativity whatsoever. And they'll reach out to my parents, they'll be like, oh, like with my mum is the sari tying queen in the family. So if there's a wedding, they'll
Really?
just get my mum on it because they know that my mum can literally drape anyone and just make them look
I
magnificent.
need to call her.
Um,
I
and
need to
she just
call
has a way. She'll
her.
like look at the person and like it's like she gives them sari therapy. And then my dad, not only is he amazing at cooking, which is a little bit unconventional for a man of his
Yeah.
age, being an Indian man, but he is also like the family painter. So like he's always painting and things like that. So I've had that. However, they did
Yeah.
work like more typical jobs in the sense that were based in offices and things like that. So because I had that around me, I suppose that I did honor that and like love all of that. But I don't think
Mhm.
all Indian children have had that. A lot of them have had this idea that
Definitely.
all of that is just like fun, but it's not really work. Um, and I
No,
think that's the
definitely.
biggest part of the problem. We've not respected it as work. And like you said, like when you did what you wanted to do, you were in love with it. I was the same. Like when I got to college, I studied business studies, media studies, and graphics design. So pretty much what I wanted to do. The only subject that I wish I studied and didn't was theatre, because I do
Mhm.
so much sketch making and online stuff,
Yeah.
presenting and acting and that sort of stuff. Um, and I was in love. Like when people cry about their A level experience, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
For me, it was amazing. Like I love graphics
I hated
design,
mine.
media. I still, like yourself, I look back to my media study notes now, or when I'm watching a
Yeah.
film, I still remember everything that I learned. And people are like, how? Why do you even like care? And I'm like, well, probably because I studied what I wanted rather than
Yeah,
being forced
so
to
true.
do something that really wasn't me. So
But what's interesting, when I had to do that diploma afterwards with my company, I really didn't want to do it because I was so afraid of going back to university again. Also, I did it at Warwick. So going back to Warwick, where I studied my law degree, I was just like, I hated studying law. I found it so arduous. I really, really didn't enjoy it. And I used to feel so anxious all the time.
yeah,
And then when I was almost forced to do this, I loved it. And I think that's the importance as well, is that, it's so important for people to really see what people are doing. And I think that's why, people who are sharing their experiences and talking about how they got there and giving advice on what to do really helps them, because ultimately I do think people underestimate how long and how hard it is to work for yourself
yeah,
and to also create content. And we spoke about this the other day, and I actually told my brother, because he watches you all the time, and I said, did you know Parle had to really learn Gujarati and really ask all the time and do skits over and over again? And he was like, really? I thought he was just amazing. I was like, so did I. Like, you don't realize the amount of time and effort that goes into
yeah,
doing each and every single video. And even with this podcast, when I was doing an audio version before and it was just a podcast, I was fine. I was working really hard and I was churning out content every single
mhm,
week, organizing it, recording it. Now I'm like, wow, there's so much work involved. And I think people don't often know that. They just look at the success and they think, oh, I want to do a podcast. Oh, I want to do YouTube. I'm going to get 10 million followers. They don't see how much time and effort it takes.
no.
So I guess,
You're absolutely right in saying that. I was just going to say that it's this visibility thing, right? So everything comes down to visibility. And today in 2020, in the 21st century, visibility is everything. If there was more people like yourself who can show the world how happy, successful, engaging, and confident someone can be if they went and did something like a management diploma,
yeah,
then more people would actually do it. But for so long, the visibility of what is successful has been doctors, dentists, entrepreneurs, or
yeah,
people that, well, I'm going to say entrepreneurs, but I mean like a conventional entrepreneur.
yeah,
That's been the idea of what is successful, what is great, what is glamorous, who has a big home, who drives a fancy car, and those things have equaled happiness. And that's what people have understood is let's be happy with that. Whereas now, because you were doing what you were doing, I'm doing what I am doing, and countless others. There's so many people. The internet's full of people like me. I always say that, and because of that, people are actually like, well, actually, this can be like something I can do to find my own happiness or
definitely.
find my own success. But it has taken hours and hours and days and years of hard work and loads of doors slamming in your face, and
Yeah,
sometimes you just
yeah,
don't understand. You're like, what? I've done literally all the requirements. I've climbed every single rung of this ladder, and now I'm just being like pushed off the top. And you just become a skydiver by the end of it. You're just so used to just climbing up, falling down, and then climbing up, then falling down, then climbing up, falling down, spending like days, if not weeks. Sometimes almost feels like a month where you've just done nothing, achieved nothing, earned nothing as well, money wise as well, right?
literally.
And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
something will happen and you will get back to work and an email will come through and it will be like the gig of your dreams and you say yes, sign that contract, and you're back to work. But a lot that takes a big toll on yourself. Like you have to give up on this idea that you will be doing what everyone else is doing. You have to give up your weekends, your Friday nights, your
you do.
social lives, your how you spend as well, how you holiday. Like I now holiday at the end of the year when I'm like, okay, actually I've done enough work this year. I do deserve a holiday. Whereas other people just book them like in March, and I'm like, what? It's January. How can you be on holiday in March? But I suppose you find your own system, right? You find what
You
works for
do,
you,
definitely.
what um is letting you pay the bills, letting you earn, fulfilling you, developing you. And I like to have this like triangle, which is
Hmm.
like your earnings, your development, and your fulfillment. So, first thing all Indians look at is earnings. Like, oh, am I going to have enough money to
Yeah,
drive the car I want, or the home that I want, or enough to save up for the house? So that's really
And it's
important.
important
Of course
also.
it is.
I think some people say, oh, it doesn't matter how much money you earn. It definitely
100%.
does. It
And
you and I think people misplace
I
that.
feel like that's one of the biggest things that a lot of people in the creative industry ignore. And I think that's actually a negative thing, because you're putting hours in, you're producing content, you're actually shaping someone's whole entire day by creating something. Like in this pandemic, when you've not been
Really.
able to go out or meet up with people, you've been indoors consuming television, film, digital content, music, all of that comes from people like myself who are working on those things. They're not made in 2 or 3 days. It takes a lot of time. So for you to have that laugh, or for you to cry at an emotional scene, or for you to connect, or for you to feel uplifted, or for you to watch the news and be like, wow, this is happening on the other side of the world, it comes because there's people like myself who are working hard at that. And none of that's easy. So we do need to get paid, and we do need to get paid fairly. So money is important, then your development's important. Like a lot of people are like, why don't you just make, one video a week? Why don't you just make comedy content a week? And the thing is, it turns into a cheap thrill. Like, okay, I made another video. Yep, I've got this many 100,000 views or whatever with loads of comments. Great. And you're like, well, how am I even developing? I'm doing like the same character, the same accent, the same everything, literally the
Yeah.
same everything. Like, why do I feel so stale and bored? Like, okay, my audience is happy, but am I happy from it? So your own development's important. And
I love
then
that.
that comes down to fulfillment. Are you fulfilling your dreams? Like that, you can get into this thing where you're doing something publicly and people love you for that, and then you're sort of like, yeah, but what about what I want to do? Like, I don't want to just make comedy videos. I want to do a serious role, or I don't want to just make videos where I'm in them. I want to film other people's videos as a producer, or actually, I want to
Mhm.
work in radio as well. Like, I need to explore these things for my own fulfillment to see where I can position myself in the industry. So they're the
Wow,
three
I love
they're the
that.
three things I always tell everyone about: your earnings, your personal
Mhm.
development, and your like fulfillment at the end of the day. Can you come home
So
from a long
nice.
day of work and feel like, oh yep, I had a really fulfilling day where I'm just
Content. Yeah.
yeah.
I love that. I think that is such a great model. And I think people listening or watching this are going to really enjoy
I
that.
hope so.
No, I love that. I think it's so lovely. And you touched on a few things I want to talk to you about. One was, resilience and making sure you persevere. And I think that really is what you said, it's in your DNA. But the other thing you touched on, which I really found interesting, is what you said about career. So people always say, the one thing I think within an Indian community people go on about is respect. You'll always have respect if you're a doctor, you always have respect if you're a dentist, or you work in the medical field, or you're a lawyer, or whatever. But somehow when you say you work in the creative industry and you make YouTube videos, or for me I do a podcast, people are all, sometimes are like, okay. And there seems to be a lot of negative judgment. When you decided to leave your job, your corporate job, how did you deal with that negative judgment?
So if I'm honest with you, I didn't get too much negative judgment from like my family or people around me, because
Mhm.
it's a confidence thing. And
Yeah,
if you have to put a front up, then you have to do that, because you now yourself are a brand, whether you are
yeah.
a restaurant owner, or whether you are launching a podcast, or whether you're doing YouTube videos, whatever you're doing. If you want to go down that whole, I'm going to work for myself and I'm going to leave the job,
Hmm.
no one is going to feel confident unless you do. And I was thinking about this last night, actually, where a lot of what you do is believing that you are crazy enough to achieve all these crazy things that you do. And you have to do it in a way that you're not putting on the confidence for anyone but yourself. So,
Not yourself.
like I always say that
Yeah.
sometimes we dress up, we look smart, and we're not actually trying to impress anyone apart from when we look in the mirror and go, oh my God, I feel like a king. I'm completely king with this
Yeah.
look today. And someone later on might be like, oh, like, why are you dressed like that? And it's just like, well, what's that to
Yeah.
you? I feel like an absolute don, so I don't
So
care what you're
true.
thinking. And you just have to do that. I think that's a big part of what I did, where um, I didn't really care what other people were thinking, especially because there's no point asking like a doctor on what type of paint to finish your home with, and you're not going to ask a painter decorator on how to I don't know, amputate someone's hand. Like you have to ask the right people for the right advice and guidelines. So like you have to remember that sometimes people will criticize you, but you also have to remember that like they might not be the right people in terms of validity. So like there's no point listening
Mm-hmm.
to people on the internet. I always say this to people. They're like, how do you work on the internet? And you know, you get all these negative comments, but I always say, but who are they coming from? I'm like, they're usually faceless
Wow.
profiles of nobodies. I'm like, it might as well be a voice in your head. If the if
Yeah.
the criticism is coming from someone you look up to, if it's coming from, you know, an academic or a professional in the industry, if someone
Mm-hmm.
is mentoring you and saying, Parle, what you're doing is wrong, then bow your head down and actually take that in. Criticism is the best thing you can get. It's like the sandpaper or, you know, the polish to
Yeah.
a piece of art. And it's not like just ignore it and do what you want. That's what makes you careless. But I think there's like a four letter difference between careless and carefree. So be carefree with your creativity and your goals and your dreams, but don't be careless. So like it's that balance. Like never let your pride turn into arrogance where you're so obsessed with yourself you can't see your own shortcomings, but never ever ever let that light dim down. And even if it's a dim light, appreciate that actually a dim light can be really beautiful as well. It doesn't always need to be like fire every single day of the week where you're just like, you know, really really over energetic. Sometimes it's just like a quiet sort of confidence that, yep, I'm content, today's been a quieter day, but I'll move forward. So yeah.
Wow, you really are inspiring me so much
Thank
today.
you.
I've never heard that before. So lovely. But, you know, just on other people's opinions, I have been someone who's always cared about what other people think. And, you know, the fear of not, I think sometimes it limits you in what you want to do because you're so fearful about other people's opinions, like you said. And, you know, this is so important what you said is that when you believe in something yourself, and somebody criticizes you for it, it's okay because you're so confident in what you believe in and you're so strong in that that nobody's comments will affect you. But the other thing I've realized recently, and I can't remember where I heard this, but people's opinions always change. And so if you're focused on what they're going to say, it's going to change the next day. It doesn't matter. And that has really helped me recently to just not care because they change on a daily basis. And often what I find is when you're successful and you're doing really well, people's opinions will always change around you and then they'll start to support you. And that's how you really fish out, I guess, the good and the
I think
bad.
that's one of the best things I've heard all year. Like people and people's opinions are always changing. Gosh, you need to quote that, tweet it or something.
Yeah.
I will tweet that and be like, read what she said. It's so true. People's opinions are always changing, and there's been so many incredible people who started off and were ignored or never appreciated. Like no one appreciated them, and then after they've become someone, all of a sudden everyone's like, amazing, what an amazing story. Oh my God, you had nothing. You started with nothing. And it's like, yeah, I did knock on your door when I had nothing, but you were ignoring me. But I'm never one of those people who who leaves a bitter
I
taste in
agree.
their mouth. I'm like, well, yep, that's a part of life. I'm never, a lot of
It
people will
really
be like,
is.
oh, they ignored me for 5 years and now they want my help.
Mm-mm.
I will never help them. And I'm like, well, no, don't become like them just because you're
But
successful now.
also,
Like,
you know what? It also is, you know, if people who I've got for the second season of the podcast, I reached out to the first season and they didn't reply. And that's okay because they also needed to see potential in you for them to come on the show and for people to be engaged and for them to also give up their time. So I think if I had an attitude of, oh, I already asked them and now I'm in my second season and they're asking to be on it, that would never create a healthy or right relationship. It would just boost my ego and actually I would just end up losing. So it's really important, I think, to always try and understand the reasoning behind it as well. I think it's very difficult for sometimes when people are the opposite, when they're really negative about you and then they're really positive. I think it's very difficult to understand why. But often when you do dig deeper and you show empathy and you show compassion, you really understand that it was just coming from a place of insecurity or worry or fear. And ultimately, I really think it's important to really share success as well. So if somebody is rooting for you, then that's great and appreciate for them. Doesn't matter if they were hating you before or they were rooting for you to, you know, not do well, but it's important that they're doing that now.
people can change, and I believe that forgiveness is a big part of like life. And as you just said about empathy and compassion, in fact, you know, this whole topic is expectations on in Indian sort of culture and the rest of that. But if you look back into Indian culture and Hindu culture, um, like dharmic culture overall, then forgiveness, compassion, love, destroying your own ego, understanding that your ego is your biggest enemy, all these things are a huge part of our culture
Yeah,
too. So that's been a
massively.
huge force in my life. Without that, I could not have ever done what I do. Because the thing is, you
I
always
agree.
have this option when you're doing all these things to sort of feed negative energy with more negativity. But what I did and what I still do is I placed any doubt in a higher force and looked back to something pure and positive that isn't connected to any people but is connected to something divine. And that's what's helped me ultimately just continue to continue doing what I'm doing, to look
Mm,
into Hindu scriptures, to let those things guide me rather than constantly being obsessed with people. I'm a huge believer in like good positive energy, and a huge believer, as you
same.
said, that people are going to change, things are going to change. So you kind of like,
People's mindsets are going to change. You know, people will start, like you said, the more and more we talk about this stuff, people will think, oh, okay, I used to be like this. Okay, I want to change now. And we have to allow people to go on their own journey. I'm not perfect by any means, and I'm sure everyone has their own flaws. And if you're always held to those flaws, and you're also going to be recognized for only your flaws, then how are you ever going to find the strength to change, right?
exactly 100%. And that whole idea that people are perfect is literally where I think the issue lies, I suppose. Like you have to understand
Definitely.
that everyone has flaws and they will change and they might even come back to those flaws, but everyone's on their own individual journey, I suppose. So yeah.
Completely agree. So one thing you said to me when we spoke last was that, you know, a lot of people ask you around career
Mhm.
advice and, you know, what to do and how to start up. What advice would you give for people listening and watching this if they wanted to start a creative
Yeah. So first thing I
career?
always say, inside of like me, you want me to answer these questions because like big part of working in the media, especially someone that's young, and I don't have anyone in my family that particularly did these sort of things. My cousins and aunts and uncles, and even a lot of my like close friends that I grew up with, they're all successful in their own right, but not in this sort of industry. So there's this big
Mhm.
imposter syndrome that happens as well. Like I watch myself on TV, and I'm
Yeah.
like, what? Like, how did you become a presenter? Like, come on, like
Yeah.
pause for a second. Like, how did any of this happen? So the first bit of advice that I always say is that you really have to create multiple avenues into what you are doing. You need more than one road in, whether that's
Okay.
if you are running, let's say you want to start up a business in the creative industry or something like that. You need to understand that it's so fragile that you need to create multiple opportunities for yourself. So if you're knocking on one door with this hand, make sure you're knocking on another door with this hand. So if that door doesn't open, then that one does. And as soon as that one doesn't, be ready to knock at another one. So you literally have to be on it and on the ball. You have to make it your life as well. There isn't this, oh, I'll spend, 2 hours once a week on the weekend. It does not work like that. I'm just being really honest. Like, you really have to want this. Like, there's no, oh, I'm going to take it slowly and that.
Mm-hmm.
You can slow down when you get into traffic, sort of thing, but really, you have to be ready to put your foot on the gas pedal and ready to, hit 80 miles on the highway, sort of thing. That's my personal advice. I would say that put your blinders on. Don't worry about what anyone says. Don't expect any sort of direct support from your family. Be ready to fall out with people that you thought were your best friends, because when you start doing something unconventional, something different, something unheard of, something new, it rattles people. It makes them feel unsettled.
Mm-hmm.
and that can bring out a negative energy in them. They might become jealous or envious, or they might begin to worry about you. They might tell you you're doing the wrong thing, but ultimately you have to decide whether this new thing that you want to do is the right thing or the wrong thing for you. So be your own boss. And yeah, don't give up. I know it's really cliche, but don't give up, and just understand your own process as well as a human being. If you fail and you feel low, you're not going to feel low forever if you process that. Don't turn it into baggage that you carry around. Process it. Give yourself, 5 days to feel sorry for yourself, watch Netflix, gloat about life, read sad quotes on the internet where you feel a little bit more sorry for yourself. And then slowly, 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 you'll get over that. And you'll realize that actually, okay, I processed that and I'm ready to, get back on the bike and start pedaling again. So I really, really, really hate this idea that if you want to be a presenter, you have to be constantly happy. If you want to be an actor or a model or someone on the internet, you constantly need to look, okay, no, you don't. You're allowed to break up. You're allowed to cover up, make up. You're allowed to feel crap. You're a human. I feel like nature's giving you these emotions because you're meant to process them. So sometimes the tide will go out, sometimes the tide will come in. Adapt, 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 adapt. That's my biggest sort of advice, I suppose. Yeah.
I think everything is also temporary.
Yeah,
that's what my mom always
and everything's
tells me,
subject to change, like you said, right? So yeah.
Definitely. And it's so important to not it's important to also process your feelings. I think some people just have this toxic positivity of like, always be happy, everything will be okay. It's like, no, sometimes I just genuinely need to cry, and I put on a sad movie and I just cry. And then the next morning I feel better and my skin's nice because I've been crying. So it's like all my skin looks great. I wake up and I'm glowing. And there we go.
Therapy, it's a thing, isn't it?
Exactly. It definitely is. But, the one thing I think is important is that you have to work really, really hard. And people always say, how do you do it? Well, I wake up early and I sleep late. However, what I also have realized, and I posted about this, is that during this lockdown, I have felt a lot slower. And even though within the first season I was churning out videos every single week, I've also recognized within my body that this season, when I've been trying to do that, I found it really difficult. And that's okay. If I'm a little bit slower this time, it's okay. It doesn't mean I'm not recording 4 podcasts a week. It just means I'm not editing and then releasing them and showing them every week. So
the thing is, you realize, right? Like, actually, that it comes back down to that triangle thing, right? Like, okay, you're making lots of content. You might be earning from it or whatever, but your fulfillment begins to fall because you're not looking after the other part of yourself. So fulfillment doesn't actually just come from your work life. It comes from your personal life. It comes from your me time. It comes from the time spent with your family on your other things that you're doing in life as well. So like, understand that fulfillment isn't just work. It can be, sitting and doing nothing or just lying around and moping around. You're allowed to do that, I suppose, as well. You just have to fit it into your timetable and not let it turn into like a negative slump where you're like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, because that tomorrow will never come.
And you still need to have that, I think, work ethic and discipline. Discipline is the most important. But, you also need to not let yourself get burnt out, because then you don't start to think of these great ideas. You won't have the room to have space to think about what the next one is going to be or the ideas that you want to share. So it is important, I think, not to burn out too. Mm-hmm. But I think you need to publish. I think you need to publish that triangle.
Really?
I think so. It's amazing.
Trimurti of excellence. Yeah, maybe.
I think people are commenting this triangle. Someone's going to publish it before you. I think you should publish it before I publish this video.
Yeah, I might post about it on my story and be like, okay, I did this vidcast thing with Shivani, and I'm just going to be like, hey, so
just before someone steals it, I think, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And I do work with this triangle with a lot of people that I'm like mentoring or that are younger and want advice as well. Or just like friends and family. I always tell them that, like, think of life like this. And there's another thing I always say, that a lot of people say that there's not enough time, I've not had time, I don't have time. And I always say that if there's 24 hours in a day, 8 of them you spend sleeping, you're left with 6, right? So then another...
So much time. There's so much time. People are lazy, in my opinion, sometimes.
And lazy and just...
unproductive.
They become unproductive because they don't think systematically. And like, this is where I say that academic studies are important because it teaches you to meet deadlines. It forces you to do things that you don't want to do. It puts you out of this comfortable sort of environment. Like creating content or making videos or running a business isn't about you being on some sort of comfortable journey that is just so exciting and cute photos and post on the internet like, oh, today I did this. It's really not that. It's really uncomfortable. It's such an uncomfortable experience. The amount of things that I've done that have made me so uncomfortable, and people are like, but you look so confident doing it. And I'm like, yeah, but really inside I was dying when I did that theatre show or when I did my first radio interview, whatever. But you get better. You learn from it. From each time you are uncomfortable, your calf muscles get stronger at treading the water, and then that becomes a part of, like, you know, your muscle memory to deal with being uncomfortable. If you don't want to be uncomfortable, then I would say, I'm very sorry, just give up now. But if you can deal with that, actually you can learn something from being uncomfortable, and then actually the things that once made you uncomfortable will actually make you comfortable, then continue.
I agree. I completely agree. So before we close, I feel like we could talk for hours, if I'm honest.
Too much.
Before we do close, I want to ask you, what's the one thing you change around the Indian expectation on careers?
I think let me do something a little bit different. I think one thing that I wouldn't change is this whole idea of chasing success. 100% chase success. But the thing that I would change is, what do we define as success? Or what do we define as good? Because then that whole idea of expectation is a good thing. This whole idea that, you know, chase a career with no expectations, that's not fair on you. You need, in a society that we live in, I think that you are going to have some expectations, and expectations are good, right? It's like,
yeah, I completely agree.
It's a hot day, you're outside a swimming pool, you're going to jump into the water expecting it to be cold. So you have an expectation it's going to cool you down, right? Otherwise you wouldn't do anything. The whole idea of you taking action or moving is because you know that there's a little bit of an end goal, but we just have to sort of redefine what is good and what is bad. So once we do that, then it's okay to set healthy expectations rather than it just being this constant negative thing where, you know, we're not working to fulfill our souls and like passions and things as well. So like, I wouldn't change everything about having expectations. I wouldn't say that, oh no, give up. Like we Indians, we shouldn't expect whatever. When and if I have children, I will literally have so many expectations as well, but I will wire them around the children rather than children wiring them around me. Yes. So I will work a bit more like the wire in a circuit rather than the battery or the light bulb. I'll let them be the light bulb, and I will help.
I'm loving your theories today.
Yeah.
I feel like you should write your own inspirational book.
That's literally how I get through life. It's just analogies that I'm constantly creating.
I love them. They are amazing.
That's my process, right? Like I always say to people, find your process, find what is right for you and what works for you. Some people, you know,
mine is usually analogies as well, but I'm no way near as articulate as you.
No, I'm always creating analogies like that. But I think that's what it is. Like expectations are good, but if you do them in the right way, and not turn them into these toxic, like negative, really, you know, like difficult sort of things where it just becomes something that is just horrible and not nice to process.
I agree. And, you know, I feel like I've learned so much from this conversation. I'm going to have to watch it again and write down notes, especially your triangle. I really need to put that on my wall. I've got all like content all over my wall, so I'm going to add that to it actually.
I'm so glad that you like that.
No, I really did. And I just loved recording this podcast with you. I love how uplifting it was and positive you were around the expectations. And I'm just really grateful to have spoken to you. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me on. I had an amazing time. And, you know, you're going to do great with what you're doing. I can't wait to see more of these videos that you're creating. I'm sure you're going to get some really interesting people on. And you always have my support, even if I take ages to respond. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. No, thank you so much. And I'll see you soon.
See ya.